The best teams are figuring out how to close learning loops as fast as possible and then take action on that. This is what I worry about in venture land a lot. Teams that have raised oodles of money, $50, $100 million. So you raise all this money, you told your investors, I'm going to build this like better beach ball. And then you're like, well, actually, I spent a year doing this and that's a bad idea. And you have no breathing room to go back and be like, oh, let me iterate, because you've taken a capital structure that makes you look like a growth stage company. It's really difficult for those founders to have those conversations because they have already kind of line of sight anchored into something which no longer works. Great to be here, Jeff. Thanks for having me on the cast.
I'm excited to have this conversation. We were going to try to do it in the car, but we weren't able to get our schedules coordinated, so it didn't happen. But
Unfortunately.
Yep.
But I'm excited to ride around your Ferrari someday.
I don't have a Ferrari yet, but there's time. Well, let's start from the top, and then we're going to dig into a lot of topics. But let's start from the top and tell me about Nava.
Yeah, so Nava, we're a relatively new firm. We started in 2021. My partner Freddie and I spun out a large platform fund called Highland Capital. We try to keep it simple at Nava. We do thesis-driven, stage-oriented investing. We only do one thing actually at the stage level, Series A. That's it. I think there's like a very special moment in a company's life in Series A, and that's something I've been fortunate to work on for the last coming up on 15 years now as an early stage investor. And so I love focusing on that sector. Nava as a firm at Series A, we typically write $5 to $10 million checks, got to that first check in. For the companies taking that institutional capital. We're based up here in San Francisco in Jackson Square. I'm in my office. We also have a small footprint out in New York.
That's so cool. The Series A stage for me is kind of that magical stage. A lot of the companies I work with, it's right around that Series A, and it's really that point in which they start to build a team of teams.
That's right.
Right? Like I think prior to that, it's kind of one team. Maybe it's a couple pizza team.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
but like once you get that 5, 10, 15, $20 million check, you're investing that into your people and you're like really growing an organization. And I feel like that's when things can get really complicated for founders.
100%.
And so it must be fun to be at that stage and investing at that stage. For you, like why is it that stage?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's similar to what you said, in your experience of these trying to build teams of teams, the way I think about it is great founders can kind of grind their way to 10, 20, 30 million in revenue. They'll figure out a way to sell whatever it is they're building. But the really good founders realize at the Series A, if you built the right foundational elements, that 10, 20 you could have grinded your way through can become a 50, 60, 100 million. There's a flywheel effect that happens.
Yep.
But you really have to focus, I think, at the Series A. What are those core pillars that mean this company? What is that culture we're building? What is it that we are doing in terms of refactoring the company? Oftentimes at the Series A, pre-seed to seed is important, but usually you're doing similar stuff. You're trying to have something stick on the wall, right?
Right.
At the Series A, you're actually doing that first time refactoring of a company. Okay, we learned some stuff. What do we hate? What do we love? And it's important. It's a little bit meta, but it's like, how do you refactor that company the first time? Because then you're going to have to keep doing that, the B and C as you grow. So It's a unique moment in a company's life where I think if you spend time with those founders, if they get it right, they can start building the foundational elements of a flywheel, which hopefully does become a great company. And it takes a lot of effort and time and experimentation, like I don't think it's ever obvious, like what to do. And I think I'm always a little bit skeptical of the VC rule books of thumb or the blog posts. They're like, well, every company looks like this and everything you show. It's like, well, that probably means you're building an average company. There's some patterns, things that rhyme, but every company is different. It's got a different set of problems.
Yep, 100%. There's things that are similar, and then there's so many things that are different. And I think that's what makes working with these teams, for me personally, so fun.
Oh yeah.
And I really try to focus in on those things that can move the needle, like focusing the team, creating that alignment, getting everybody rowing in the same direction, and using some tools and some cadence to create those habits, right?
Absolutely.
One of the things that I think is unique about that stage, and I think I'm curious to see what you think, is it's kind of this inflection point where they have learned some things. Like you said, prior to A, we're trying to get things to stick on the wall and everything's an experiment.
Yeah.
And then I think once you get to A, it's like, hey, this is beyond thesis. Now we have like some things that work. Like 1 + 1 = 3 now. You know, a lot of times I was doing 1 + 1 was equal to -10.
Right.
You know, and like, so I think from day one with a founder, like they are experimenting, trying to get things to work. And then once they start to build a team, they can start hiring people that are better at it than them. They can like compound on those, getting those things to work. What have you seen as kind of those common things that are most challenging at that stage?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of different things. I think one of the hardest things to do, and you said this, and I'd be curious from your practice, Jeff, what you see. I feel like less is more. That old sort of idea. And
Yeah.
oftentimes good teams are good at doing 10 things at once. And everybody's like, well, in startup life, you got to go into ramen mode and do it all, etc. Yeah, there's some truth to that. But I
Mm-hmm.
really do think the teams I've been lucky to work with that have gone like all the way and big outcomes and changed the world have those that have really figured out, well, there's only one or two things that matter here. And let me just nail that, right?
Right.
I was an early employee at Google, right? Google made so many mistakes. I love reading all these case studies at Google. But they did two things really well, search and ads, and it covered up all kinds of crazy products that never worked and bad ideas and just silly things, right? And that never gets written about, right? That was
Right.
a core part of Google's strategy. It was very much this idea of like, let 1,000 flowers bloom. It wasn't some top-down like vision statement of this is what we're doing and somebody,
Right.
it's like Steve Jobs kind of mode. It was not like that. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the best companies kind of embrace that. What is that one or two things that I can do so well that will just like change the trajectory of this company. I'm curious in your practice, Jeff, with the teams you work with. It's all about peak teams, peak performance, peak OS. Like, what have you seen?
You kind of distilled it. Like what I spend the majority of my time on is saying, what are the most important things? And I oftentimes it's like 3-year vision. Like let's just put a stake in the ground.
Yeah.
Tell me what are the top 5 things we want to accomplish 3 years out. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
If we want to go deeper, sometimes we'll do 3 in each of the functional areas of the business, build that out from there. But like even the 1-year plan, it's always like trying to get people down to like, what are the top 3 to 5 things we want to do? Because when it comes down to focus, like what this is the thing that I've learned over the years. Everybody has been told to focus.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you have kids, you've told them to focus.
Yeah.
Like, right. If you have any mentor, they told you to focus.
It's like brush your teeth. Like, of course. Yeah. I'm gonna do it. Yeah. But what does that mean?
And tell me when you've been taught how to focus.
Right. Exactly.
None of us have gone to a class and taught us how to focus. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so now we enter the world of I'm a CEO and I'm leading a company doing something where there's no blueprint. If we were creating another plumbing company, we could go next door and look at all the plumbing companies, but there's no blueprint. So now how do I focus multiple people around an idea? Yep. And what I've come to the conclusion over the years, we can't have focus until we have alignment. Yeah. So not until we agree what we need to do can we ever have focus. And so where I spend most of my time with teams is really saying, what are the top 3 things we want to do this quarter? Or what are the top 5 or 3 things we want to do in sales this year? And I know you know a lot about OKRs, and we're going to get into OKRs in a minute. I have some beliefs around OKRs that I think make them easier to use, but it really comes down to that. It's capital efficiency. It is. Because if we're doing 500 different things, which most teams are going 16 different directions, they're wasting so much capital and so much energy, and eventually they'll burn the team out or they'll run out of money. Yeah. And there's not a lot left to show for it. Right? Or both, right?
I also kind of along those lines, that burnout, I hate this myth that happens in the Valley of like, you got to like code red your team every day. You got to redline it. You got to push hard. I think that is the stupidest thing ever. Like, I think, there are moments where you have to push hard. Absolutely. Right. That's just life, right? That's not just business. It's life. Right. But if you're doing that every day, that is not creating a great environment for creativity, for being productive. It's just putting people on edge. And
Right.
I do see so many companies that kind of like white knuckle it all the way.
Yeah.
And it's terrible because they end up building incremental products. They're
Right.
not allowing that space for conversation, that space for people to say, I don't know, to sit in
Right.
ambiguity. And that's really, really important when you're trying to do something big and creative.
100%. I 100% agree with that. And I think it's a fallacy. I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of teams.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, the ones that are not white knuckling it are the ones that succeed.
Right. Absolutely.
Right. And I think when you are white knuckling it, you're all about right now, right now, right now. And you don't have that bigger picture.
Yeah.
And you just never get out of that cycle of right now. That's probably one of the reasons why I really love to walk a team backwards from the 3 year to the 1 year to the next 90 days is because we need multiple focal points. Mm-hmm. And not only do we need those focal points to like have that long game and get there, but we also need to align on each of those. Yeah. If we're not aligned on that path, then we need to discuss it and we need to get aligned on it. Totally. Otherwise, either we don't have the right people or we need to have more conversations until we agree on that. And that stuff's going to change, I think. Yeah. It always does, but you have to at least have that alignment with the team. And even if you don't agree, at least, disagree and commit.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I totally believe you're right. The teams that are just constantly like that, name a sports team, a championship sports team that goes 100% every single second of the day.
Yeah. It doesn't work that way. It does not work that way. And I think it's unfortunate because I see a lot of young people like burning out because of it. Right.
Right.
And especially as tech has now become ubiquitous, I think, yes, there's tech companies everywhere, but I think also tech culture has changed a lot in some ways for the worse. And this kind of idea of like, it's 24/7, et cetera, et cetera. I think it just really limits the type of kind of companies you end up building, I'm curious for you, Jeff, because you focus on like that 3-year vision. I often find founders can tell me their 10-year big idea and they can kind of tell me their 90-day thing. But that 3-year is like really messy and it's like very hard for them to articulate.
Oh, a lot of people want to argue with me about the 3-year and why do we do a 3-year and it's going to change and all that stuff. But I think the magic behind it is and it works with teams that I have that are just entering their Series A. I've done it with teams that are in the seed stage and later stage, but it's kind of a magic number to me because you have to put some stake in the ground a little bit farther out. Yeah. I mean, like you'll build your financials that far out, right? With assumptions, but like, what is it actually that you want to accomplish? And I think that helps align the team. And if you can't explain that, it's really hard to hire people, right? It's really hard to get investment. Yes. I think, because you have to have some sort of tangible like roadmap of where you're going. And if you can't explain that, like who wants to get on the bus with you? I always use an analogy. It's like the 1-year plan's the peak of the mountain in front of you. The 3-year vision is 3 peaks out that's aimed at your mission, right? Okay. Now that 3 peaks out, it's gonna be hazy. There's gonna be some clouds. Yeah. Maybe there's some snow on the mountain. You're not gonna be able to exactly get every single detail, which is fine. You want to have a high, big picture. Again, like some of my teams, I'll just say, hey, we're the top 5 things we want to accomplish 3 years out. That's it. Yeah. Like we don't need to get granular on this. Some we build out more, and I think that can help. But I think you need that path. And I think that path really is about, again, getting the team on board, but getting excited too. Like what are we here for? Totally. What are we building? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that what are we building is so important because so I teach at Stanford as, and I always talk to my students, I teach engineers, it's like, is the thing you're building something I could have come up with over lunch or is there like a deeper need here, right? Because if you're doing something that's like, I'm always like, oh, we could have figured it out over lunch, don't do it. If it's that kind, it's like not worth it,
Right.
Like, and I think that's so many companies are like, okay, I just want to start a company, but why? What is the problem? Is it like a deep problem or is it like a superficial problem? Because starting a company is not hard. Building a product that lasts and having a company endure, that's like the odds are stacked against you, like
right,
whatever, 1% of 1% of companies actually end up like working out, right?
Yeah. I can relate. I mean, I remember I studied entrepreneurship in college and I started 3 businesses. One turned into a company.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
But I was that way. I was like, I just want to build something. I just want
Yeah.
to build something.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a lot of skills. I didn't have a lot
Mhm.
of experience. And I built a construction cleaning company
Oh, cool.
because that was something that was within my capability of
Yeah.
doing at that time. And we really grew a great company, and I was able to sell it when I exited college, and it was the .com boom, and I got excited to go into tech and venture
Cool.
companies. But like, I just wanted to build something.
Yeah.
I just wanted to build something. I just
Yeah.
wanted to, get my hands
Yeah.
dirty and build something.
Totally.
And that was great. What I find too now is, I think that's great if you want to build something, but
Yeah.
seeking that why, I think,
Yeah.
is so important. And there's so many
Totally.
reasons for that.
Absolutely.
And I like to think of that as the mission, and
Oh
the
yeah.
mission and what's that? Simon Sinek would say, your cause, purpose, or belief. And that's, I see as my North Star.
Yeah.
Right. So in that analogy of the peaks, that
Yeah.
North Star is like why we're doing this in the first place, why we're taking this journey in the first place. And
Totally.
if that doesn't motivate you, it's going to be really hard to get up every single morning.
It's tough, especially now where I think so many people are taught, like young people, like building a company. I want to be the next Zuckerberg or Jobs or whoever, right?
Right.
And it's like, hey, like that's awesome. I love that you want to change the world, but like also balance that with sort of like doing something with purpose and like value, not just like being famous for famous sake, or I want to do a TED talk because,
Right. Right. Right.
what is the message you want to send? And I think that's really important when you start talking to venture capitalists, because I think a lot of people talk to VCs because they think it's a rite of passage to building a company. I appreciate that distinction between a business and a company, but like only a very small set of companies should ever take venture capital. And
Right.
especially today, I think it's synonymous with, well, if you're doing tech, you got to take venture. And that's terrible. I think it's only a few companies are really set up to take on venture capital, like cars. And so I'm
Yeah.
sorry I couldn't do it in the car with you today. But I think about venture as like nitrous oxide. It's like you put it in your engine, it's gonna make you go really fast, a little bit out of control. Some engines are like beautifully built to handle that. So like a Google or a Facebook that can just absorb it and like go and can go a little unstable. Other companies are just like great companies, but you should never take this because your engine will blow up. Like you can have
Right.
an amazing business that's doing $100 million a year in revenue. That should never be a venture backed business. It just doesn't work that way. And I think that's the thing I talk to a lot of young people about today, entrepreneurs that are building companies. I love this idea. I love your space. I think it's wonderful. Like it is not built for venture. Venture is a very specific way to build a company.
Yeah. I like to reflect with them, and I do some talks too. I do a lot of stuff with Techstars and a lot of other groups.
Great organization.
Yeah. And, most Techstar companies are going to take on venture.
Totally.
My question to them is, why do we need this speed?
Right.
Is there competition?
Yeah.
Is it the right moment of that technology meeting that industry? That way you have to move fast. Like what is it that you need, and why do you need speed to do what you want to do? And I think that's because that's, like you said, you're that speed is allowing you to go really fast, but it also causes a lot of other challenges along the way.
Totally.
And maybe you don't need to go that fast,
And I think that's true. I think faster is not always better.
Right.
Sometimes that's like we're just kind of built in this kind of world of like faster, bigger, better. But I think that's totally wrong.
Right.
Like I use this analogy sometimes with my students. Like today I live in San Francisco. If I want to fly to London, it's like, okay, well, you want to be on a faster jet. Maybe you want to take that Virgin Galactic flight that goes up really high. You get to London in like 45 minutes, right?
Right.
And like, maybe, but what if we changed what the airplane was? What if it was like a luxury spa, Four Seasons experience in the sky? Maybe I'd be like, okay with that, like 9-hour flight. Like, get me there slower, let me enjoy myself, right? Maybe the Wi-Fi is awesome and it's like, this is like luxurious, and then I land and I'm all rested and ready to go, versus now when I take that flight, I'm like half tired. And if you have to go to a meeting, you shower at the airport and kind of like, try to like shave in an airport bathroom. Not fun.
Yeah. Rethinking time and timing. Yeah. I think that's a really interesting thing. Changing gears a little bit, I'm curious, you've done a lot around human-centered design, right? Like you've spent some time with IDEO. I think, right. I don't know if that's part of your teaching at Stanford.
It is. Yeah.
How have you taken human-centered design approach to the venture world?
Yeah, it's a
you
great
work?
question. Yeah, not a lot of humans in venture, that kind of school of thought. So it's basically a problem solving technique, right? There are many different ways to think about the world and how to think about the
Mm,
world. And for me, it was something that I studied at Stanford. It spoke to me. It let me kind of, punch above my weight when I was a young product manager at Google, building kind of maps as these systems that were like enterprise grade or touching billions of people. Like, you're like 22, you're like, I'm not qualified for that. Like, how can I ever do that, right? But it gave me that kind of confidence to problem solve.
mm,
And I think when I think about venture capital, I think about it from the perspective of, what are like the really deep latent human needs you're solving for? Everybody in venture, I think, always talks about the tech side, right? Like, what's the next GPU right now, or whatever things, right?
mm.
Tech's easy, and tech is kind of I think it's very reductive. There's only one dimension to think about a business. The other side is the business side. That's the feasibility of it, right? Is how much does it cost? Capital efficiency. Everybody always talks about that. I don't think enough people spend enough time talking about the human desirability of something, right? People talk about it in like superficial terms in consumer companies oftentimes, right?
Mm.
Like time of day, time to share a wallet, things like that. But oftentimes I think whether it's an enterprise company, if you're at Databricks or Confluent or something, or you're at Snapchat, you're still the end user that touches this thing is a human being in some shape and form. There's a human in the loop somewhere. And I
Right.
think not enough people spend enough time thinking about that human being, even at the enterprise side, right? Like, what is that person, he or she, dealing with every day? Why does this product need to exist in their life?
Mm,
And on the enterprise side, one of the things I often think about is when somebody's using your product, does it make them feel like a superstar? Does it make them feel cool within that peer group, within that company? Does it make them get promoted because they're going to list it on their resume? I'm an expert in blah, blah, blah thing, right? Those are the things I think that really, really matter that people don't spend enough time thinking about. A lot of people spend enough talk for hours about budget, share a budget, but like if the best companies, it's not just about share a budget. It's like this tool, someone's going to be sitting on every day. It's going to affect who they are.
mm.
And how does that interrelate with sort of their growth in this company, And I think that human side of it is so important. It's easy to be dismissive of it, right? Because
Right.
it's messy, it's hard, it's very qualitative. You can't quite put it in the spreadsheet. Survey's not going to capture it. So it's like, well,
Right.
how would I measure that, etc.
When you look at companies to invest in, are you looking for companies that have products that have human-centered value
Mm-hmm.
that you could?
Yeah. I mean, I do, and I think one of the ways I look at that, the framework I always use is like I love to invest in companies that are in A+ markets, but are B+ products. The product is very rough around the edges, lots of duct tape, right?
Mm,
And which I think is actually kind of reasonable too, because if you're a Series A company, how in the world could you build a Ferrari? Like you've raised maybe $10 million, whatever, not much, right? Like,
yeah.
and how could you build a perfect end-to-end product? That's insane, right? So, but you could build something that's maybe works a little bit here and there, right? A little kludgy. And what I
Yep.
love to look for is like, okay, even if somebody built something a little kludgy, a lot of duct tape around it, that problem is so painful. I'm willing to step through all these hoops to still use that product, right? And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. That's what I want to kind of dig into and
Mm,
like pull on that string and like thread and be like, what's going on there, right? Because I think the
right.
best founders get that and they're like, okay, this problem space is so acute. If I just solve it a little bit, then I'm onto something. I think
Mm,
the thing that's really difficult is that people end up sort of saying, well, I got to build this feature complete thing that's huge, that solves this problem. And it's just like, it's just feature creep, right? It's like, you're not
yep.
really spending. I always encourage founders, don't problem solve, problem define. Like, what is the problem you're trying to solve, right? Don't
What's the
just say,
real
oh,
problem?
what's the real problem, right?
Yeah.
Spend hours and hours and hours on that. Don't spend like 80% of your time on that and do 20% on the problem solving part.
Yeah, we have a system. Part of Peak on the weekly meeting
Mhm.
is triage, and that's the majority part of the meeting. And
Yeah.
in triage, it's all about issues and opportunities.
Mm.
And we have a system to kind of really peel the onion back. It's really to understand like what is the core issue though. And I
Yeah.
really have teams keep on saying that. So it's like, okay, great. I hear the problem, but what is the real problem? What
Yeah.
is the real problem? And I think the deeper you can get into that, you'll solve a lot of problems, and you'll come up with a lot of opportunity to do something even better. But I think that's so true, is like, I think sometimes people are just fixing things and moving on. And I think, again, that's the probably white knuckling, right? Like, freaking out, like, I want to solve this.
I'm so glad you push people to do that, because I feel like if you do that right, it's the unlock to incredible value. You know?
My role in that is to get them into the habit of doing it when I'm not there. And I think, and creating that process of triage every week is to get the teams really good at that. The teams that get really humming on that weekly meeting, I love it because they're excited about that meeting because it reduces a lot of other meetings, and they get a lot of things done. So those things are on the list. They go in there, they assess the situation, figure out the core issue, define solutions, and then act. It's all about like making a decision to do something about that. And then you move on.
Totally.
Versus, how many meetings have you been in where it's like the same thing comes up every week, and then we go around and around in circles about it, and then the meeting's over and we have to get out of there, and then next week you'll come back and you'll probably revisit again. So like for me, triage is really drilling down to the like main core issue. Most teams struggle more at that than they struggle coming up with ideas.
Yeah.
Once you have the core idea, like plenty of ideas of how to solve that, and then let's choose one and like move on.
Yeah.
And so if a team can knock a whole bunch of those out every week, they love that meeting, right? Because
absolutely. And I think that's kind of back to your point on like focus. People aren't really taught to problem define. They're taught to problem solve, right?
Right.
Like you don't go through school saying, well, is this even the right math problem I should be solving, and why? It's like, okay, I want to do this. Like take the derivative. Okay,
That's so true. Yeah. Here's your 20 math problems. Just do them.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
It's not like, okay, this is going to teach you this. This is why this fits in. It's just like, just do it.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about OKRs a little bit. I've had a lot of conversations about OKRs and people using OKRs. I've changed the system a little bit. With our teams, we call them peak OKRs. And a couple of the things that I changed, I want to get your input on this, is we build OKRs at the leadership team level. And it's typically 3 to 5 objectives every either 90 days or 180 days. Those are anchored in our 1-year plan and 3-year vision. So it's not building them in a vacuum, which I found a lot of teams building OKRs in a vacuum. We start at the leadership team level, but before that meeting, we do prep work bottoms up to bring some of the things there. So it's the top 3 to 5 objectives for the company next 90 days. And then we don't cascade those down, but we build the key results. Only the people in the room own those key results, even though their teams may be working on that stuff. And then we create another layer. So let's say you're a head of sales, and we've got a head of marketing, head of product. Each one of those people then create another layer of OKRs within their team. So if I'm the head of sales, I'll create another 3 to 5 objectives for the quarter and key results within my team. And if there's other teams within those teams, we'll build other layers. One of the problems that I had with OKRs over the years when I started doing them way, way long ago was that it never cascaded down real perfect or magically. I do a session with the team and they're like, these are great, but nothing says anything about product. What about our product team?
Right.
You know what I mean? Why are we just going to ignore product for the next 90 days? Or we create OKRs and they're like, this is great, but what about all the other work I need to do? And so what I really thought is what was missing is every team needs to be focused. Right. And that's what we're really trying to accomplish in OKRs. Now, the other thing that I think I found key results to be a little impractical. I think teams should have KPIs and metrics outside of the OKRs. I think OKRs build the capabilities to hit your metrics. And then within the key results, I think it should be really about how do we accomplish the objective. And I think teams don't have that conversation. They like to put a bunch of numbers on it and measure their progress towards it, but they never discussed how are we actually going to accomplish that objective. And that how we accomplish that, I think, should really be the key results. And they should have names on them and they should have dates on them. And they should be reviewed weekly or at least every other week. But those are some of the nuances that over the years, really trying to make OKRs work in companies and seeing so many companies fail to even get them off the ground, or so many companies use them and get fatigued because they're not working. I just kept on going in there in the lab with so many companies, and that's what we came out with. And today, the companies that use it and figured it out, like, love that. And I just wanted to, I know that was a lot, throwing a lot at you, but I'm just curious your opinions on that.
I had the privilege, like, I don't know, 20 years ago, working with Larry Page, running Google's corporate OKR process through the IPO and as it was scaling. I love OKRs, but I think they're so misapplied. So I feel like people take them, and rightly so. They're like, this sucks. This does not work. And it doesn't. I think a lot of times it's not sort of, it's like a hammer and the nail kind of thing, right? Like
Right.
OKR works. Number one, you have to figure out, do you have the right culture as an organization to have that as the management tool? The types of things you're building, does it even make sense to have OKRs for, first of all, So I think
Yep.
spending time really thinking about that, I don't think people talk about that enough. Then, to your point, it's like, okay, if they don't exactly work, how do you customize them to me? Like, what makes sense,
Yeah.
And I love that, like, because one of my great learnings from Larry and all these wonderful people at Google that were deploying this stuff was it forces conversation and forces alignment, back to that kind of keyword, right? And that's the point of it, right? It's not just kind of like draconian, like, okay, let's drudgery of like, let's check every week. Are we tracking to 1.1 now to 1.2, whatever the KPI is?
Right.
And I love that you're actually forcing those conversations, and that's the point of it. The point of it is that it's dynamic teams moving quickly. Stuff changes all the time. If we get out of sync, if our gears are kind of missing, how do we get back in sync, right? How do we kind of just reassess and think, are we even doing the right thing?
Right.
Like, it's kind of arbitrary. Why are we shipping over a monthly or quarterly basis? That's totally arbitrary, right?
Again, are we asking the right question? Are we solving the right problem? Right.
Totally.
Yeah.
So I think things you said are so critical to surfacing conversation, surfacing alignment issues, and then having the conversation like, okay, how do we recalibrate?
A lot of people I found don't see that magic. You actually made me feel really good right there, because like the magic's in the conversations.
Yes.
And I know a lot of teams are like, I need to get back to work. And I'm like, no, this is the work.
Yeah.
This is the work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And if we do this right, your work is going to be a lot easier.
Totally.
You know what I mean? They're so stressed to get back into the office or back into their office and start working and not having these conversations. But like the magic that I see when we're doing OKRs, where people are going back and forth, I see that it's kind of like synapses connecting. Yeah. You know what I mean? And it's like, that's the magic. Because the magic is having the conversations. And what I found early, and it took me a little while to like tweak it to figure it out, but what I found early is having the conversation. Once we define those objectives, and I have a process to do that pretty well, it's getting into the key results and saying, okay, I see our objective. Like, how do we actually do that? What do we actually need to do to accomplish that? And defining those things. And I like to make those tangible, things that we can actually accomplish, versus things out of our control. Can't always do that. Versus throwing a bunch of numbers on it. Now we know when it's off course, but did we ever have that conversation about what do we actually need to do? Like, that's super important, because every team, especially venture-backed teams, are highly cross-functional.
Yes.
Right. And so if we have that conversation and we figure out, okay, Steve needs to do this, Laura's going to do this, and Ryan's going to do this. And, oh, wait, nope. Like, Laura needs to do this by this time, then Ryan can do it.
Right.
Then it works.
Absolutely.
Right. But if you're just like, we're going to do 5 of these and 6 of these, and it's just, you didn't have that deeper, you didn't go the layer that you need to go into to actually make it work.
100%. I think a lot of teams suffer from that, because it's like creating your TPS report, right? It's like, I'm doing a bunch of stuff.
Right.
So it feels good. I'm doing stuff, but it doesn't matter, right? How does it align with others, right? So I think that's really, really important in early stage teams.
Yeah. And then I've blended how to get racy in there, because we have people that are own every objective, own every key result. And then we have an other section, like who also is responsible to help or consult on this to help. Yeah. And so you can kind of blend that in. I found people use racy and it gets really confusing. But yeah, OKRs are a very powerful tool if they're used appropriately. And if the teams can just spend a little time and energy to have those conversations, they go so much faster and so much farther.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's something I encourage early stage teams to do a lot of, is think about how you think, right? This idea of, how do you refactor? How do you actually do that versus just jumping in doing it? Because that's really important. Best in class companies have thought really hard about how they build. It doesn't just, you don't just intuit your way to it, All
right. I think another misnomer is it is okay to change an objective. It is okay
100%.
To change a key result mid-quarter.
Yeah.
And that's what triage is for. Is any of those things that are off course, we talk about them during our weekly meeting. And guess what? Sometimes the solution is we need to change this. there's a lot of times, especially at early stage, growth stage companies, you'll choose to do something, and partway through the quarter, you'll find out like, no, we don't want to do that. Now that we've kind of climbed up that mountain a little bit farther and have a different perspective, like that might be actually detrimental, or we're stuck. There's a ravine here. We need to try something else. And guess what? That's okay.
100%. Like, I think the best teams are figuring out how to close learning loops as fast as possible and then take action on that. I think it's really painful for me. This is what I worry about in venture land a lot, is like teams that have raised like oodles of money, $50-100 million, like the A seed and A, right? So you raise all this money. You told your investors, I'm going to build this like better beach ball, whatever it is, right? It's a better widget. And then you're like, well, actually, I spent a year doing this, and that's a bad idea. And you have no breathing room to go back and be like, oh, let me iterate, because you've taken a capital structure that makes you look like a growth stage company. It's really difficult for those founders to have those conversations because they basically have already kind of line of sight anchored into something which no longer works.
Yeah. That learning loop, I think that's really interesting. I actually wrote about that in Peak Teams. I think that learning loop starts day one, right? Like, you're like constantly learning, communicating. And I think where it gets really challenging is right when you come in with that Series A, because that's how do we create that learning loop now that we're a team of teams?
That's right.
It's pretty easy when you're like one team and you're all together all the time and you're, even if you're on Zoom all the time or whatever it is. But once you have a team of teams, now you have to have a system that really connects that learning and make sure that learning keeps on coming in. And so, it's simple things like doing a quarterly review and then setting up your next 90 days. Like that's a good way to have that learning loop, but then have that weekly learning loop as well. And just trying to keep that connectivity, because when you hire really quickly, odds are there's going to be some people that are not the right hires, there's going to be a lot of new personalities. The DNA is going to change fairly quickly of the organization. And it's like, how do you tie all that together? And what I see a lot of teams do is, as a good CEO, you want to empower everybody, right? So everybody comes in with different tools or different ways that they've done it in the past, which is good because you hire people that have actually been successful, right? If they come in and they don't know how to do it, you hired the wrong people. But you hire people that are really successful and they have opinions because they were successful and they want to do it again. But how do you like duct tape that new system of operating together with all these different opinions, especially when you're bringing a lot of these people in at the same time? Next thing you know, you have this kind of operating system that looks like it's duct taped together, like some sort of API here and there. And then we're working on this Great Plains software, trying to connect it to Salesforce, through email, that's what it looks like.
I'm glad you call it out, because I often say there's a big difference between a team of A+ people and an A+ team. You can have great people from all, Facebook and Palantir and Google, but they have no idea how to communicate. And it's all just like incremental, actually ends up becoming negative because they just work in different ways, versus the A+ team, which maybe not everybody is like a rock star coder, developer, or whatever it is, but when they work together, they actually like amplify each other, And I think that's really important, especially when you're hiring, to think about how does people say this stuff, but they don't actually do it. How does this person fit into our culture? What is our culture? How will this person amplify the other people around us? And where they don't amplify, how do we deal with those disputes, right? Culturally or otherwise.
Yeah, it made me kind of think of like the idea of like an all-star team. They're fun to watch.
Right.
But they don't operate like the championship team.
Totally. No way. Yeah. I love that analogy. Yeah. It is just very much like the all-star team versus the team that like wins the title.
Right. And I like to reflect on like sport teams in general. I try not to use too many of those analogies, but every team has a system, right? Like if you've done any sort of high level sport, and I coach wrestling and pretty high level within jiu-jitsu, and like it's all a system. Like the best athletes like know the path to where they're going and what they're going to do. It's a system. I like to, even in hockey, like if I was behind the net with the puck and I was a defenseman, I know if I go left or right, my winger is going to be playing their role and they're going to be in the right situation. I think some teams don't know what their system is, and they're kind of trying to operate all these unique individuals with no kind of system involved. And I think that's one of the challenges. And I think where it breaks down, and why I was excited to talk to you, is I think you see it break at A.
Oh yeah.
You see it break at A.
Absolutely. I mean, I see it all the time because that pre-seed to seed, you don't really need a system, right? And this is like, you can kind of will it into existence, right? And even the people you're hiring, this idea of teams to teams, pre-C to A usually know most of the people. In the good teams, it's not like a cold hire. It's like, well,
Right.
you're 1 degree away, so-and-so work with you, or I work with you someplace, whatever it is. At the A, that's not possible. Because you're scaling. Unlikely you're going to know every single person. And it's going to be much more about, okay, how do you bring someone in that's actually from an interview process through your
Yep.
own systems of filtering, etc., and digesting that person and bringing them up to speed. And I think it starts with the team and culture, but then it goes to sort of, I think, looping back of like, what did we learn, being reflective and changing, like, hey, we thought we could do this, we can't, and being
Yep.
honest about that. Like, we thought we'd have a culture that was like Palantir or Google. We don't,
Right.
we don't have a right? Like, turns out I'm not, Steve Jobs. I don't have the vision I thought I did, right? Like, and being honest about that, that's okay. That's great.
Right.
But then being like, okay, what is our strengths? What is our core capabilities? Like, how does that core capability map into this market?
Early stage, it's good to have some systems. You don't want to over systematize.
No.
It's at each stage, knowing at what level we need focus and flexibility.
That's right.
And I think it will change as the team gets larger and builds.
Yes.
But having, kind of going back to when you put that fuel into the car and you're going to go really fast, you might want to make sure you have it on the road first before you do that.
Oh yeah.
And have the right suspension and have all the right things put together.
No, I think that's so critical. So many companies now, because the pressure to just raise and celebrate fundraising, which I also think is pretty foolish. Like, raising capital is not something to be celebrated. It's
right.
It's the most dilutive way to build a business, right? Your
right.
precious equity, which is finite, you're saying, I'm going to sell it at a discount to be able to fund a future potential, right?
Right.
It's like, okay. And I think there's all these people like, oh, we've reached unicorn status or whatever it is. I'm like, that's terrible. Like, that is not how you build wealth or generate value. It's actually like profits and like building a company, impacting people in their daily lives. That's what should be celebrated.
Yeah, the one thing I reflect on a lot, the first time I was involved raising capital, I was talking to a VC, and this is probably 1997. And he said to me, he goes,
peak bubble.
Yeah. He said, Jeff, you don't build $100 million company. I'm like, what? He's like, you first build a $1 million company.
Yeah.
And then you build a $10 million company. Then you build a $100 million company.
Right.
And I was just like, that just always stood out to me because I think a lot of people just are out here and they're right here, but they don't see that path.
Right.
And it's why it reflects on me too, is like, you're building a real business. And I think some people forget about, like, at the end of the day, we're trying to build something that has a strong foundation that will last. We're not trying to create some smoke and mirrors and try to sell something real quick and get out. Like, at least the good ones aren't.
The good ones aren't. Right.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things when you think about, storytelling in Silicon Valley and company building, everybody celebrates the spectacular win, or like almost like laughs at the spectacular failure. Like, oh, that was obvious, right?
Right.
Nobody talks about like the messy middle of how hard it is to do this stuff, right? It is not obvious, right? There's no playbook you just like step through and like, okay, now I built my $1 million business. Now I built my $10 million business. It is not that easy.
Rome wasn't built overnight, but Rome was really built very messy. If you actually read the history, It was highly messy. Yeah. Well, I want to talk about one other thing before we wrap up, and that is kind of the intersection between your experience with product and product leadership, and then taking into account like human-centered design, and now the world of AI. Like, what are you seeing within kind of the intersection of what's happening with that?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. I am so excited about this right now because I think it actually democratizes technology in new and fast, like really cool ways for people, because even 4 years ago, if you wanted to build anything, you have to go get like a lot of expensive engineers to go do that, right? To even kind of get a reasonable prototype going, right? Or you have to be reasonably technical yourself to kind of get something going.
Right.
What excites me about AI is that it abstracts away all the tech junk. Even though right now in the news, like more people know the word GPU than they should. That is not important. That is irrelevant in my mind. Like, who cares? That is not important, right?
Yeah.
People don't need to know about that. What's important is like, well, what is the problem I'm solving? And what I love about a lot of the tooling that's coming up with AI, and I think the last 3 years have been about infrastructure. I think that's going to shift over the next 3 or 4 years. It's going to be about the end application, the end user, the vertical AI, whatever it is, right? And that's exciting for me because then you're going to have people that are really knowledge experts in the industry being able to innovate, create very quickly, test ideas very quickly because of all this great tooling and see if there's a there. And they're not going to feel like, oh man, I've never, managed a team of engineers, or I didn't work at Google, so how can I build product, right? And that for me is amazing. That's going to create all these new types of solutions and businesses. And, I think it's analogous to sort of eBay stores, like whatever it was 30 years ago, or Shopify stores, right? People that could become entrepreneurs, even though they're not like in that world. Or today, like TikTok and the influencers and all these young people that are just, creating these mega businesses. And I think that's really exciting and really good for people because now there's be like competition, people can create things, etc. There's gonna be a lot of noise, a lot of garbage as well, right? Like because that's just how these systems work.
Right.
But I'm excited that now somebody who isn't from Silicon Valley, right, can actually probably go build a business pretty quickly at scale if they really understand the market they're operating in.
Yep. And not be limited by not understanding how to build product and.
Yeah, totally. It's like, what Adobe did for designers many years ago. It's like, I didn't go to like graphic art school or RISD or whatever. I'm pretty good at Photoshop and Illustrator, right? And now there's like tools like Canva and Figma. I can do pretty like slick looking stuff without like having gone to like formal training,
Yeah, you can go a lot farther faster.
Absolutely.
With those things. And I think that will really create an interesting environment of companies that will get funded that are a little bit farther down the road. It will probably protect some of the investment of the founder that they're able to go farther down the road. And also give, I think, the investors a little bit more confidence in what they're investing in.
100%. There'll be a little bit more data there, right? Like, okay, you had it in market for a bit. I can kind of, figure out how sticky it is. Is there?
Yeah. Okay. So one last, I have two questions left. But the first question is, what do you think is not talked about the most within kind of the venture world that you think is important that you don't think gets enough light?
I think there is not enough discussion about the importance of vulnerability in venture and tech company building in general.
Yeah.
I think everybody has to have this like bravado of like, I'm the biggest, I'm the baddest, whatever. I got my TED Talk in my pocket. I'm changing the world, Right. And I think that's really bad. I think, I think like the best founders, and I think people have really created companies, they have vision, but they're also vulnerable, right? And they also like, I don't know, let me think about this. These are hard problems, Right. And I think, I don't need to be in the press every week talking about stuff. I don't need to be on Twitter every week talking about whatever, right? And I think I would love it if people could turn up the volume more instead of saying like on that, turn down the volume on the bravado and turn up the volume on like, this is hard and it's okay that it's hard. And like, let's really like give people time to like think and like build something of value, I think there's too much pressure on like, go bigger, go faster, like all the time, 100%, redline it. I'd love it if people call that out more as like unhealthy and it's actually not the right way to build,
Yeah. Well, I totally can relate to that. And I think it's hard to be vulnerable because I think you need to be confident. I think it's good to be confident.
Yeah.
You see definitely some egos, too big of egos out there as well.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously
those are the most vulnerable, like they're the most brittle. Like I feel like
100%.
Yeah. It's like so easy to like that crack those eggs,
Yeah. It's so telling, right? You're telling. I think when it comes down to it too, and I think it's not intuitive to some people, but like if you fake it until you make it, I don't think people want to help you.
No.
Right? Like, but if you're okay being confident but vulnerable and saying, hey, I don't have the answer. Like I know the direction, I know what we're trying to solve, but I don't have all the answers.
Oh, yeah.
people naturally want to step up and help you.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You know what I
Totally.
mean?
Yeah,
I want to join the team because I feel like I can contribute to like
totally.
helping this. But if someone's coming off like they figured it all out, well, then you're probably joining a team where someone's just going to tell you what to do.
Exactly. No, it's exactly right. It's like, why would I do that? If you figure it out, go. Great, you're done. You don't need my help, right?
Right.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I do the pressures of raising capital, hoping that your team's happy, the customers are. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody's your boss and as that
Oh yeah.
CEO, and I think
Oh.
it creates an environment where it's hard for people to breathe.
I agree, and I think that's the problem. I don't think it's like the CEO's fault. I think it's the culture. Today's culture around company building and venture capital
Mm-hmm.
creates that kind of CEO because they're trying to, meet the needs of all their customers, right? It's like
Right.
if I don't do my TED talk or I don't have my Twitter thing, people are going to be like, "Oh, you don't have a media presence. Like that's not good. How are you going to do this and that?" And like it's this like unfortunate downward spiral, and
Yeah.
I don't have a good way out of it. So that's the problem. But like I don't actually have a good way out of it because I do think it's kind of this like beast that needs to be fed,
Yep.
And the only thing I know is like as much as you feed that beast, what's really going to matter is are you building a product that people want,
Yep.
Because
Yep.
even if you're like the most famous person on Twitter or TikToks and that gets you in the customer's door, the customer's not going to spend millions of dollars on you just because you're an influencer. They're going to be like,
Yep.
is this solving my problem?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Well, I don't know the answer to it, but we've defined the problem, right?
There we go. There we go. There we go. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So this is my last question for you. It's the hardest question I asked all day. So
Okay.
I'm glad you're ready for this. And so it's more of a scenario. And here's the scenario.
Yeah.
You are trapped on a desert island the rest of your life.
Okay.
You have food, you have water, you have everything that you possibly need.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing that you don't have, though, is entertainment. There's no entertainment on this island at all.
Okay.
Luckily for you, an old 80s boombox drifted ashore, and it has unlimited batteries, but you can only bring one album to listen to the rest of your life.
Ooh.
What album are you going to bring?
Oh my gosh. That is such a hard question. There's so many songs like going through my head. Oh my God. Like, I'm going to give, okay. I was gonna say I'm gonna give multiple genre answers, but I'll give you one answer. I would actually say Michael Jackson Thriller, since it's 80s boombox.
Oh wow!
I feel like that album was just so innovative. I love Quincy Jones. He's such a amazing maestro. It's just like from a like just creativity perspective,
Right.
It's poppy. I don't know if there's a lot of meaning in those songs, but it's something that I think like what I love about it's just so accessible around the world, right? Like if you look at like YouTube or whatever, the people that just like fell in love with those songs,
Right.
it was like, wow, this is amazing. That's what I love. It's
That's
just
a good one.
Fun and accessible. I'll probably be pretty lonely, so I'm a good one. So I probably want something a little upbeat versus, classical.
Well, that's funny because the only cassette tape that I can ever remember putting it actually in a boombox in the 80s was the Michael Jackson Thriller album.
There you go.
Maybe I skewed your thought by saying the 80s boombox thing, but
no, but I feel but I think if you have an 80s boombox, it'd be weird to, like play Doce on it or something modern, right?
Yeah.
You need something like of the time,
That's so great. That's so true. That's so true. All right, man. Thanks so much for joining me on the show. Great conversation. I loved it.
Great. Well, it was so much fun, Jeff. Thanks for having me.